Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today we will be sewing up the Phoebe dress. First we're going to start with our ties. You're going to take your two ties and fold them in half lengthwise with right sides together and pin along the length and one edge. Then we're going to take our ties to the sewing machine and we're going to sew along those edges with a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Now we're going to turn our ties right sides out and give them a really good press and top stitch along the entire length of the strap. For step 2, we're going to work with the front bodice. So we're going to take our outer front bodice yoke and we're going to line up our ties with the notches along the neckline. Then we're going to take our lining yoke piece and we're going to place it right sides together, sandwiching the ties in between the two, and we're going to pin our neckline in place. I like to start by measuring down a 1/4 of an inch from the V and putting a pin there so I have a stopping and starting point when I sew. So I'm going to take this to the machine and then I'm going to start where I placed the pin at the V point and go along one side of the neckline and then flip it and go along the other side of the neckline. That way I am always starting my stitches at the V point. Alright, now that that's done, we are going to just clip into the V point, not going through our stitches, and along the neckline. And then we're going to flip that through and give it a good press. Alright, so I like to tie my ties out of the way, and then we're going to start by placing our side panels onto our front bodice, and this is piece C. So we're just going to line that up to the edges there and pin in place. And then we're going to sew this with a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now we're going to move on to the back bodice. So we're going to start by taking our back bodice with right sides up, and then we're going to align our lining bodice piece with right sides down so it's right sides together, and we're going to pin along the neckline edge and sew that with a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, now we're just going to clip into the curves there. And flip it around and give it a good press. Okay, now we're going to move on to attaching our side panels like we did in the previous step. We're going to put them right sides together with our outer yoke and pin in place. We're going to repeat this for both sides of the back bodice. After we sew it with our 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, we're going to take it to the serger and finish our edges. and press the seam to the side. Okay, now that that's done, we are going to take our back piece right sides up, and we're going to place our front bodice right sides down, so it's going to be right sides together, and pin along the shoulder seam line, making sure to match up that center point there. And we're going to sew that with a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, now we're going to prepare our sleeve, and we're going to start with piece F, and we're going to serge our bottom edge, and we're going to fold it up and press it at 1 centimeter to create the casing for our elastic. So just fold that up and press it, and then we're going to top stitch it in place. In order to figure out how much elastic you need at this point, you're going to measure your wrist and add 1 inch, and that'll be the length of elastic that you need to cut. And we're going to cut 2 pieces of elastic, 1 for each sleeve. Using my loop turner, I'm going to insert my elastic at each end, securing the elastic in place, and then we will take it to the machine and just give it a little base stitch so that it doesn't come out. And we're going to repeat this for the other sleeve. Now, working with our upper sleeve, we are going to attach the gathered portion of our bottom sleeve to the bottom of our sleeve, and we're going to sew that with a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, now that that is complete, we are going to serge those edges and press it up towards the sleeve head and pin along the seam allowance, and this is going to create our casing for our second piece of elastic. So we're just going to top stitch this down. Alright, to figure out how much elastic you need for this section, you're going to measure around your elbow and add 2 inches. And you're going to cut 2 of these, 1 for each sleeve. And then we're going to insert it the same way we did in the previous step with our loop turner. And we're going to repeat this for both sleeves. Now we're going to take this to the machine and just baste on each edge so the elastic doesn't come out of place. Now we're going to attach the sleeves to the bodice, and we're going to line up the center of our sleeve with the shoulder seam on the bodice and pin all the way around the arm side. And we're going to take this to the machine, and we're going to sew this with a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then finish all of our raw edges. Okay, now that that's done, the bodice is almost complete. So we're just going to set that to the side, and then we're going to work on our skirt panels. So we're going to run 2 lines of basting stitches along the top to create our gathers, and then we are going to find our center point and line that up to the center of our bodice. So adjust our gathers evenly and pin in place. We're going to repeat this for the other skirt panel and sew that with a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance and finish our raw edges. Okay, now we're going to sew up the sides of the dress. So we're going to start by matching up the underarm seams and pinning those. And then we're going to pin down the entire length of the dress, the skirt, and then we're going to pin the entire length of the arm. Okay, and we're going to sew this from the hem of the arm all the way down the sleeve, pivoting at the underarm seam, and then down the rest of the skirt with a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And then we're going to finish our raw edges and press our seams to the back of the dress. Now we're going to fold up our hem by 1/2 inch and then another 1/2 inch and sew that in place and give it one final press. And Thank you so much for watching the sew along for the Phoebe dress, and I really hope that you enjoyed making it with me.